Hey Felix, how's it going?
Pretty good, Mayank. How are you doing?
Awesome, I'm good, thanks. Felix, you and I have been discussing about super apps for some time now. Like this one app that does multiple things: ordering groceries, requesting for a cab, making payments at different stores, and all bunch of e-commerce activities. And we've seen a lot of this emerging in Asia. WeChat in China, Paytm in India, Tokopedia in Indonesia, Grab emerging in Singapore. We haven't seen a lot happening in the US with super apps as a concept, or also in Europe. How about we talk about this today?
Yeah, sounds good. It's a fascinating concept. Let's jump in.
Welcome everyone to Product Breakdown. This week we talk about super apps and its future in the US. We have a very special guest today, Felix, who is a product manager at Google. He also runs a large product management community, helping product managers level up in their careers. It's called Product Management Mastermind. Please check out the link in the description on LinkedIn, Clubhouse, and on Twitter. Felix, welcome to the show. Felix, let us get started. What are these super apps?
Absolutely. So, as you mentioned, you have multiple services, your everyday services for a consumer, all in a single app. So, you could be requesting a ride, ordering food, getting a loan, maybe doing your health and insurance all in one app. And so it's this mix of all these different everyday services. You may not get full coverage, but a lot of what you need is all there in a single app. And consumers are loving it in these other countries, as you mentioned. But one thing that's really interesting, again, like you mentioned, is that we don't really see it in US. So where have you really seen some of these take off? And can you maybe give us some examples?
Yeah, absolutely. So it all started in China. If you look at WeChat, it was the beginning of super apps. One app was a messaging. It is a messaging app which can be used to do everything. You can request for a cab, order groceries. I think it's like a mini web. So it's the epitome of super apps, if you will. Similar trends can be seen in other parts of Asia. If you look at India, Paytm started as a financial app, as a payments app, and then now you have shopping embedded into it. If you look at Gojek in Indonesia, started as a ride-hailing company, and then they have now payments, groceries, so on and so forth. If you go to Singapore, you have Grab in Singapore, similar like Gojek in Indonesia, started as a ride-hailing company product in Singapore, and then extended into different other services. It's strange that we haven't seen big names in the U.S. so far.
Absolutely. And so it sounds like with this mix of all these services, it's kind of hard to pick apart what the strategy really is. Do you have any insights there?
Yeah, absolutely. So, what is the product strategy? So, I think let's take a step back and go to the origins of these apps. It really helps us deconstruct this strategy versus just looking forward. Our first point is they all started with one specific use case, which is in case of WeChat, let's do messaging better and get to a scale. In case of Paytm in India, let's help people pay through their app. In case of Gojek, it was let's help them ride a cab or request a cab. So they all start with one use case and go deeper. Once they hit a critical mass of hundreds of millions of users or tens of millions of users, then the next question comes in. We've figured out the first use case. What's next? And sometimes the what's next is defined by sometimes it's monetization. It's a low margin game, so we have to figure out new ways to make money. So let's find complementary verticals. Sometimes it's more about a growth strategy. We need to acquire more users, so let's add complementary services. That is, there are similar services that can help us attract more users to come to a platform. If I'm providing ride hailing, can I also provide groceries so people who don't use it for ride hailing can use it for groceries and come to your platform? So it's a concept of finding the complementary use case as a next use case, and they keep adding more complementary use case to get to the next step. So that's how they keep adding, become a super app. And, uh, third one is economies of scale, which helps you really reduce your cost of operation. So if you acquire the user once through ride hailing, but then you sell them a different product, groceries, then sell them financial products, you're not acquiring the user three times. These are the three reasons why people are moving towards the super apps.
Wow, that's really interesting. So what it sounds like is The users are getting a benefit because they only have one place to go for all these different services. Super convenient, it's easy to use, and they build up a lot of trust with these major providers. And then, of course, on the company side, like you said, economies of scale, they can use a lot of the same underlying technology. So it really does sound like a win-win.
But Felix, if this is so good for the users, so good for the platform, so good for the ecosystem, why aren't we seeing these concepts in the US or the Western world as we are seeing in Asia?
Yeah, it's really fascinating. When you think about how these things started, there are a couple reasons I can think of why we haven't seen them develop in the US. One is this idea of market power, right? We have oligopolies in the US here. We have a few firms that are like huge, right? And they run a lot of these everyday services separately. And so there's a lot of competition. If one of them wanted to become a super app and start expanding into other services, it might be pretty difficult for them to gain traction in those new areas. Additionally, consumer preferences. When we look at some of these markets in the East, they're maybe not as diverse from a needs or preferences standpoint as, for example, in the US. I mean, the preferences and needs on the West Coast of the US compared to the South, compared to the East Coast can be quite different. And so Americans seem to value choice a lot when it comes to apps, right? There's a lot of different apps, for example, DoorDash, Instacart, Uber Eats, all these different ways you can order food or groceries today. There's really not one app that can rule all of those use cases. And then finally, technology. When I look back at the origin of super apps, one of the things that really stood out to me was this concept of there were these lower end devices that didn't really have the power to manage 40, 50 apps like you might see many American users with their smartphones in the US. And so therefore having these lightweight solutions all baked into one single app was actually very helpful for these less powerful smartphones. But in the US, my iPhone manages 40, 50, 60 apps with no problem, right? And so the need isn't really there as much to kind of have a single place. So those are some of the reasons I think maybe we haven't seen it explode in the US like we have in the East. However, yeah.
Felix, before you move forward, let me just get this clear. I love your 3 points. The first one is market power. The second one is consumer preferences, and the third one is technology. On market power, I'd love to give you an example, just to share an example there. Do you think a good example would be Uber is a ride-hailing company or a logistics company? Now they're saying is a logistics company, and they're trying to, if they try to come and chase the financial institutions like PayPal or a similar like a Square, it'll be very hard for them because the market power of companies like PayPal and Square is huge. So it's a pretty big uphill battle for them to go and acquire users and build a super app out of their Uber experience. Is that a good example of that?
It's really about how are you adding additional value to your users, right? And so if you look at a player like an Uber that might want to go into payments like a PayPal, if the users are already having their needs met by, for example, PayPal and even Venmo, which is owned by PayPal, then how much more incremental value is Uber providing to their users by adding on these additional services in their app, especially considering some of the other factors we talked about, like choice and optionality.
I like that, Felix. So one is definitely the incumbents are there, so it's very hard to find the uphill battle. And the second point of yours is pretty interesting, which is the market is big. The market
Exactly.
is very matured, so it's hard to show a differentiation with these new apps. So like that. I also like your angle on the technology piece. It sounds like in Asia it was the necessity being the mother of invention, where the phones were low-end phones, so there was a need for providing multi-purpose, low storage, consuming apps, and super apps just did that. One app that did multiple things. Awesome, Felix. Let's move on to the next point. I think, are we saying there are no super apps in the US, or there are a few apps that can be seen as super apps? They have traits of multi-purpose apps or multi-purpose activities happening in them. What are your thoughts on that, Felix?
Yeah, there are a couple things, right? I mean, they're maybe not as super as some of the apps we see in the Asian markets, but for example, even Amazon, right? They've already expanded to a lot of different services. You know, you can do shopping, you can do entertainment. There's a lot of things there. And even, for example, our app stores. We have two giant app stores here in the US with the Google Play Store and the Apple App Store. And you can sort of start to see this as a super app, right? You can go and download other apps to go perform all these different services all from one place. The only difference there is that the convenience factor is missing, right? You have to actually physically download these multiple apps to use all these different services, whereas the super app concept really doesn't require you to download a new app. You can take advantage of those services right there in that single app.
Felix, Amazon is a very interesting angle, and I never thought like yeah, I do understand they can also be treated as a super app, but the reason we don't perceive them as super apps is because of the coexistence of two lives they have. Like for instance, we have Amazon Prime Video within Amazon, but it's also available as an independent app. We have the Amazon Grocery. For some time, we had Amazon Prime Grocery. Now it was also available in Super Apps, and I'm seeing them merging slowly. The Grocery is no more a single app, and it's now merging towards Amazon Grocery. But that coexistence sometimes, let's just think they're not a super app. But yeah, Amazon does look like a multi-purpose commerce app that we have. And yeah, I mean, you work on Google Play Store. It's an interesting concept that they are also a type of super app. They have so much their stuff going on there. There is payment and so on and so forth. Felix, this is awesome. Love the angle. So let's extend this a little bit. Let's say yes, US does have super apps in specific verticals. We have seen some in finance, yeah, like Square and so on and so forth. We also seen Amazon
Absolutely.
coming up as a super app. What do we think is the future of super apps in the US? Tell us more about that.
Absolutely. So I think as we think about how this might play out in the US, there's a few different scenarios I can see, right? There's one which is the incumbents emerging as super apps. We've already talked about this a little bit with Amazon, with companies like Uber. They're expanding into more and more services. We also see companies like Facebook and Snap doing things in this area. For example, Facebook has always been adding services. You got shopping, you got social media, and Snap has introduced this concept of mini apps within the Snap app, right? So there are things you can do, like you can play games with your friends, you can book movie tickets, you can meditate together. So they're already starting to invest in more of these options to do more services within their app. And what's really interesting there, we may actually see more happening in this space because of some of the recent changes with tracking users and privacy. Think about it, right?
Interesting.
Facebook, for example, and other apps that rely heavily on ads, they rely on being able to track users across different apps. Now,
Gotcha.
when that gets taken away, they may be encouraged to bring more of those services in-house because that means that they actually have that data in-house as opposed to being required to leverage, this tracking of users across apps. So it'll be really interesting to see how Facebook and Snap and other companies respond to the changes from both Apple and Google with regards to tracking users.
Of this point. Incumbents will diversify, and it's very true. Like incumbents are diversifying. If you look at Uber, Uber is diversifying. Uber from one app you can now you can book public transport, and Uber Eats is also has merged
Yeah.
with Uber, the main app. So it's a big deal because now you can cross-pollinate users. If you're a user only using Uber Eats, Uber can now tell you, "Come take a ride with Uber." Uh, if you're using Uber for a ride, they can tell you Uber groceries or Uber Eats and so on and so forth. It reduces the cost of acquisition significantly, and this will show up in Uber's results in future. So this is huge for Uber, and I love the angle on what you just mentioned about ad signals. It's more about understanding the intent of the user and then using it to serve a different product, in this case, a different service. Let's say if you're a DoorDash and if you understand what the user's preferences are or tastes of the user based on their restaurant orders, they can show them relevant products from a convenience
That's a
store,
huge
from a
win for
grocery
Uber.
store, and so on and so forth. So it's a huge way of creating value for both users and for the platform. All right, Felix, love this point. Incumbents will diversify slash innovate in the direction. What else, Felix?
Yeah, there's definitely more. One of them that is also really interesting is this concept of a vertical super app, right? So this is like within a very specific niche or a very specific sector, you start to see multiple
Okay.
services. So one example is finance. I really love it because I'm actually a user of a couple of these apps. But financial, when you think about finances, there's a
Right.
few things you can do with your money, right? You can save, you can spend, you can borrow, you can invest. And traditionally what we've seen is you don't really have a single app that always can do all of those. But in the last several years, we've seen examples, for example, online banks like Ally. First, they were just an online bank, but then they bought Trade King, and now you can also invest, save, and spend your money just from Ally. Another example is Robinhood. They started off with investing and then branched out into cash management. So now you can actually have like a checking account sort of access within Robinhood. And then finally, there's another example I've seen recently called M1
Got it.
Finance. They started with investing, but you can also have a checking account. They recently launched a credit card, and you can borrow against your holdings at 2% interest. So they're allowing you to borrow, invest, spend, and save all in a single app. So that's really interesting from a finance perspective.
That's a good point, Felix. And I think insurance within finance, insurance as a vertical is also a very interesting use case where one insurance provider can provide multiple types of insurance. Like if you have one insurance company, they can provide you with auto insurance, rental insurance, and so on and so forth, only with one single app. That is some sort of a super app for insurance and within the finance sector. So I love that. Yeah.
Absolutely. And Ally Bank actually already is doing that. They already have bank and auto loans.
Hmm.
And I think they might be also looking into different options for insurance as well. So
Lovely.
this is definitely an interesting space.
Okay. One more prediction, Felix. What else
Yeah.
do you think will happen in the US?
Yeah, so there's one more that I can think of. You almost think about owning all the services, but also the hardware, right? If we
Interesting.
take a look at what Google and Apple are starting to do, they have a ton of first party services that they're providing, right? Apple now has fitness, they got payments, etc. They're even looking into ways to make the phone itself a payment terminal, right? And so then you have Google as well with their own, first party Google
Hmm.
phones and hardware. And again, of course, we already know Google's a juggernaut when it comes to, your mail, your maps, YouTube, entertainment, all these different services. So now you own the phone, you have a lot of first party services that are also keeping users within this ecosystem. So it'll be really interesting to see how these companies actually invest even further to really tackle that one thing that we mentioned in the beginning, which is the consumer convenience, right? Again, like similar to what you mentioned with Amazon, they're starting to bring multiple services into a single app. We've seen Uber combine services into a single app. We're starting to see things like Apple One and I think a
Hmm.
G1 subscription, right? With multiple services kind of under a similar umbrella. So what will they do? I mean, I feel like now the separate apps are they're almost, what's the word? These separate apps are almost invisible walls that you start to think, are they even required anymore? Do we need to have separate apps? I mean, you're starting to charge people one umbrella, so why not just combine them into one app? It'll be really interesting to see how these companies invest moving forward.
Love the thoughts, Felix. This is great. Love all the 3 points. Incumbents diversifying, uh, seeing a wave of new vertical apps coming in the US. In fact, we're already seeing it. We see more of those.
Yeah.
And then hardware as super apps, where you'll have more use cases for users' convenience, all packaged into one. And this concept of invisible walls, uh, all to create user convenience based on synergies of the experiences or business models or products that are in place. Felix, amazing. I really enjoyed the discussion. Love the passion you have for the space. And thank you so much. This was a fun chat. We're at time now. Once again, thank you so much for coming to the show. Folks, that was Felix and our discussion on super apps. Please check out his community on leveling up as product managers. It's called Product Management Mastermind on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Clubhouse. Description and details. That's all for this week. We'll see you next time. Take care.
Thank you so much for having me, Mayank. It was a lot of fun.